Hello, it's Dr. Ron Eglin coming to you from Daytona State College, and this is kind of a part two of the XML property object. In the first part, I kind of took you step by step of how to get everything working, but now I'm going to show you a little bit of how to use it. To start off with, I'm going to start with this form right here that you can see, and it's a really simple form. It's got two properties, property 1 and property 2. So I'll actually put into property 1, and then in property 2, I'm going to put property 2. Okay, or property. I'm actually going to leave it misspelled wrong, okay, on purpose. And then I'm going to hit save. And when I hit save, it should, if I got everything working, it should save it to the database. And I actually have it, comes back to the label and says, oh, 13649 inserted. You see that, 13649. That's the actual ID of the object that went into the database. Oh my gosh, I spelled it wrong. Well, I'm going to actually go up here because this is the way I programmed it, and I'm going to put, I'm going to make this a get, and I'm going to put object ID equals 13649. I'm going to change that to 13649. Okay, so now it's 13649, and I'm going to hit enter, and it actually goes out and gets 13649 from the database. You might not have seen it do that very quickly, but you might have noticed that save just got changed to update. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm fix my spelling, change it to property, and I'm going to click update. Alright, so 13649, the same number, just got updated. So I've now updated that property. Alright, so what did I do? Well, the first time I inserted it, the second time I actually put the object ID up here in the header so that it knew to retrieve 13649. Then it changed the save button to update button. Something happened in code back there. I fixed the thing and I clicked update, and now the numbers, the letters should be right. And I can actually do that by ensure that that's correct by hitting enter here. It's going to reload it and the property is spelled correctly. Or I could take this I could actually go back up here and take that object ID out of the URL and back to ASPX and hit enter, and it now goes back to a blank and the save is back there. Alright, what's going on? Well, it's very, very straightforward. First, I built a form, very simple form with label, text box, two buttons, save and update, and another label. That's all the things you actually just saw. The real action is occurring behind the scenes. Well, first, let's go ahead and stop it from running because it's still running right now. And, oops, I'm going to need to, I don't want to pause it, debug, stop debugging. Okay, now I'm going to stop debugging. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a sample page. I'm actually going to look at the class, a sample class. That's the class that actually you're putting the stuff in. And remember, it inherited from XmlPropertyObject. And all I did was I created two properties, a property 1, a property 2, with a get set accessor. So those are properties. And I did also, and I'm going to do this to kind of show how this works. I have two constructors, one which does nothing and another one which actually accepts an ID, and it actually calls the base ID. Well, I didn't actually need to do this. I could have gotten away without it, but I'm showing that I've got these two constructors. The first constructor creates a sample class blank, and the second constructor creates a sample class, but when you pass it an ID, it goes to the database, pulls up all the properties of the object with that ID, and puts them into the values that you have there. That's why the whole thing worked. Now, that part is pretty straightforward. Okay, that's just basic building a class. But now, let's go and look at this, a sample page. Let's look at the code behind for a sample page that we had there. And let's start up here. All right, so in the page load, I do two things. First, I check to see if it's a post back. Okay, because if it's a post back and you do stuff, then it's going to replace everything. So if it's not a post back, if it's being loaded from the URL, here's what we want to do. First, let's check and see if anybody put an object ID into the URL. Okay, if it's not equal to null, that means they entered something. Then let's get the value that they entered. That's really easy to do through the request.query string. Now this only works if you're using a GET protocol, which is what we did. You saw us do it. We put that up in the URL. And with that ID, I instantiate a new sample class using that ID. When I do that, I set the text of the text box 1 equal to the property 1, the text of the text box 2 equal to the property 2. I set the save button to be invisible, and I set the update button to be visible, which is exactly what you saw it do. Very straightforward if you look at the code. Second part is, well, if the user did not enter something there, then I want the save button to be visible and the update button to be invisible. All the other action that occurs here actually occurs when they click those buttons. So you're capturing those events, and let's look to see what happens when you click those. First, the save button. Well, we know this is a new object. So what we do is instantiate a sample class object. We set its two properties using the text box. Okay, then we insert, the ac.insert. But the insert method of XmlPropertyObject returns an integer. And that integer is the ID of the object that was inserted. So what I do is I put that integer into a label so I can see what it was. Well, why did I do that? Well, because I intended to come back and throw that up into the URL with the get access to get to that object. Okay, which is what you saw me do. The second button was update. Well, what do I do when I update? Well, first thing I want to do is I still need to instantiate another sample class because I've got to update that sample class. But this time when I get that sample class, I get the ID that the user entered up in the URL, bring it back as an ID. Okay, I instantiate the sample class with that ID, and what the XML property object does when that happens is it goes out and gets the object of that ID and it fills in all the properties of a sample class. Well, there's two properties I'm going to change, property 1 and property 2, with what's the text in here. Then instead of calling the insert, which would insert it, I call the update, which updates the existing object. And voila, at label 3, I say that it was updated. So I just, in a very quick, within 8 minutes, I've shown you how to create properties for an object that inherits from XML property object. I showed you how to make a form that you can very quickly and easily use to save and update values. And I even showed you how to use the get to go ahead and put those in there. And I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory as you work through it. If you've been doing this type of coding, this shouldn't be that hard. So that was quick and dirty. Thanks for listening, and I hopefully get you started creating forms with objects using the XML property object. Good programming.